Tanisha Cole had worn her uncle's old army patch for years without a second thought, until a pilot froze at the sight of it and whispered a name she wasn't supposed to know. Tanisha Cole's gloves were slick with oil, but she didn't stop. Her rag moved in precise, practiced circles over the long steel housing of the M230 chain gun. The air inside the Fort Hood hangar was heavy with that familiar metallic bite, the one that clung to your clothes long after you'd clocked out. Somewhere in the corner, a portable radio played an old R&B track so softly it was more memory than sound. This was a world, tools laid out in a neat row, checklist clipped to the cart, no drama until she heard the boots. They weren't just walking. They had that sharp, no hesitation pace of someone who belonged here. Someone in charge. Tanisha kept her head down, flipping the rag to a clean side, but in her peripheral vision, she caught the khaki flight suit and the patch-covered sleeve. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Riker. "Afternoon, Cole," he said, his voice even. Almost bored, she gave him a nod without looking up. "Afternoon, sir. I'm just wrapping up the cleaning cycle on this one." His boots came closer. She heard him set a clipboard on the maintenance bench, but he didn't speak right away. He didn't even move. Something about the stillness made her glance up. He wasn't looking at the gun. His eyes were fixed on her left arm, just above the elbow, where the sleeve of her coveralls was rolled once to keep from catching on machinery. Tanisha followed his gaze. The patch. It was old, darker around the edges where the stitching had frayed, the once bright thread now muted. Black eagle wings wrapped around a lightning bolt over a mountain silhouette. She'd sewn it there herself 2 years ago after finding it in a box of her uncle's things. She liked the way it looked. That was at Riker's hand, halfway to the clipboard, stayed in midair. His jaw shifted once, like he'd just bitten into something sour. "Where'd you get that?" His tone was sharper now. Tanisha blinked. "The patch? It was my uncle's." "Why?" He stepped closer, close enough for her to see the lines around his eyes. "What was your uncle's name?" "Rodney Cole. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan back in the early 2000s. Died. About 6 years ago." Riker didn't answer. He just stared at the patch, his breathing slower, more measured. "What's going on?" she asked. He finally looked up at her, but his expression didn't match the casual voice he tried to put on. "That insignia, you don't see it around anymore. That's from a unit that got deactivated a long time ago." "Deactivated?" "Yeah, officially. They never existed." He leaned one hand on the bench. "Who gave you permission to wear it?" That made her frown. "It's just a patch, so that I didn't think I needed permission for something personal." Riker exhaled through his nose. But it wasn't a laugh. "You might be surprised." The silence stretched long enough for her to notice the radio had gone to static. She reached over, switched it off, and looked back at him. "If you've got something to say, say it." For a moment he seemed like he might. His mouth opened just slightly. Then he closed it again. Without another word, he grabbed the clipboard, signed something at the bottom of the maintenance form, and set it down hard enough to make the pen roll. When he finally walked away, he didn't look back. Tanisha stared at the empty doorway, her hands still on the rag. She'd been in the army long enough to know the difference between someone making conversation and someone trying not to. Riker had seen something that shook him, but not enough to explain why. She ran her thumb over the patch. She'd never asked her aunt much about it, never thought there was anything to ask. Uncle Rodney was proud of his service, but like a lot of vets, he kept the details locked away. If this was some rare insignia from a forgotten unit, it didn't change the fact that it was hers now. And yet, the way Riker looked at it was still rattling around in her head. Tanisha wiped her hands, logged the maintenance check, and put the rag back on the cart. But as she pushed it toward the next Apache, her mind was stuck on one thing. That split second before he spoke, when his eyes stayed frozen on her sleeve like the patch itself had just whispered in his ear. But she didn't know that this was only the first time today someone would look at that patch like it was more than fabric. Tanisha didn't expect to see Riker again that day. Pilots had their own rhythm, briefings, simulator sessions, flight schedules, and it rarely intersected with her maintenance window unless something was urgent. But not 20 minutes after he'd walked out, the same measured boot steps echoed back across the hangar floor. She kept working, replacing a worn feeder assembly on the gun's belt system. The sound of his approach stopped right behind her. "You got a minute?" he asked. Tanisha set the wrench down and turned. Sure, Riker's expression was unreadable, like he was trying to keep every muscle in his face under control. "I don't usually ask personal questions, but I'm going to make an exception. When exactly did you get that patch? Her eyebrows rose. You're still on that? Yeah, he said, glancing toward the open hangar door, scanning for anyone nearby. Humor me, she leaned back against the workbench. Couple years ago, I was helping my aunt clear out storage after she moved from San Antonio to Temple. Found a box with some of my uncle's uniforms, medals, and that patch. Thought it looked cool, so I sewed it on. End of story. Riker's gaze locked on hers like he was measuring every syllable she said. Rodney Cole, you said he served in Afghanistan? Yes, twice. Do you know which unit? Not exactly. My aunt mentioned something about him working with another branch, maybe even special ops, but nothing detailed. Why does it matter? Instead of answering, Riker walked around to the other side of the Apache, checking the tail number like he was pretending to have a reason to linger. Then he came back. Cole, that unit the patch is from? They weren't just special ops. They were part of something called Operation Red Lantern. She tilted her head. Never heard of it. You wouldn't have, he said, his voice dropping. It's not in the public records. Hell, most of the Army doesn't even know about it, what they did. Let's just say it's the kind of thing that stays classified for decades. And the people who wore that patch, all of them, are supposed to be dead. Tanisha stared at him, unsure if he was trying to scare her or just making some twisted joke. That's ridiculous. You're telling me my uncle was part of some ghost unit? Come on, Riker didn't smile. I'm telling you that patch shouldn't exist anymore. And wearing it, it's not just bad luck, but it's like walking around with a target on your arm. Her first instinct was to laugh it off, but something in his tone kept her mouth shut. So what do you want me to do? Rip it off and burn it? That would be a start, he said flatly. Tanisha crossed her arms. Not happening. It's a piece of my family. You think I'm going to destroy the only thing I have from my uncle just because it makes you uncomfortable? Riker glanced toward the hangar entrance again. This time, his eyes lingered on two mechanics walking past. He waited until they were out of earshot. That I'm not saying this to be dramatic. You have no idea the kind of people who keep tabs on symbols like that. If someone saw it, who knew what it meant? Someone who wasn't friendly? You could have a lot more than me asking questions. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. You keep talking like you know more than you're saying. So why not just tell me? His jaw worked for a second before he spoke, because I'm not sure who's listening, and if I'm wrong, I've just wasted both our time. But if I'm right, you're in the middle of something that could get messy. That hung between them like static. That I'm still not taking it off, she said finally. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Then he turned and walked toward the hangar exit without another word. Tanisha watched him go, her stomach tightening. She didn't like being told what to do, especially by someone who couldn't back up their warning with facts. But the way he kept glancing over his shoulder made it impossible to dismiss entirely. She shook her head and went back to work. But her hands weren't moving with their usual confidence. Every time she looked down at the patch, Riker's words came back, supposed to be dead. But she had no idea that before the end of the day, someone else would show up with even more questions and far less patience. By mid-afternoon, the Texas sun was pouring through the open hangar doors in that blinding, white-hot way that made even metal seem to sweat. Tanisha had moved on to inventory checks, counting parts in their foam-lined cases, trying to focus on numbers instead of Riker's words. She was halfway through the belt-fed ammo crate tally when the echo of voices caught her ear. They weren't inside the hangar. They were outside, just past the threshold, somewhere in the narrow strip of shade between the building and the maintenance office. She recognized one immediately. Riker. The other voice was lower, harder to make out. Told you I saw it myself, Riker was saying. Left arm, coveralls, same eagle, same bolt. The second voice answered in a quick, clipped tone. You sure? Could be a copy. Plenty of surplus floating around. Riker's reply was sharper now. Not this one. This isn't something you find at a flea market, and if she's wearing it, someone gave it to her for a reason. Tanisha froze, one hand still in the crate. Her first thought was to step back and make noise so they'd know she could hear them. But curiosity pinned her to the spot. The lower voice came again. You think she knows what it means? No, Riker said without hesitation. She looked confused, but that doesn't matter. If the wrong person sees it. The other man cut him off. You want me to put it in the report? Not yet, Riker said, his tone softening but only slightly. Let me talk to her again first. But if she doesn't listen, it's your call. There was a pause, and then the sound of footsteps moving away. Tanisha straightened up, her mind spinning. She'd never been the subject of a conversation that felt this dangerous. They weren't just talking about uniform regulations. They were talking like the patch was a security risk, or worse. She heard the door open at the far end of the hangar. Riker stepped inside, eyes scanning automatically before landing on her. His face didn't change, but the hesitation in his walk was all the confirmation she needed. He knew she'd heard something. "Everything good over here?" he asked. "Depends," she said, setting the crate lid down with more force than she meant to. "You always talk about me to people outside the hangar." He stopped a few feet away, expression flat. "You were listening?" "I was working," she shot back. "Your voice is carried." Riker rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man regretting a decision. "Look, Cole. I was trying to keep you out of something, not pull you into it. Then stop talking in circles and just say what's going on." He glanced toward the wide open hangar doors again, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than before. "There are units in the military history books, and then there are the ones that never make it there. Red Lantern was one of the latter. The patch you're wearing? It was their emblem. The fact that you have it is already strange. The fact that you're wearing it in plain sight? That's dangerous." She let out a short laugh, though it sounded more like disbelief than humor. "Dangerous how? What do you think's going to happen? Someone's going to arrest me for wearing an old piece of fabric? You'd be surprised who notices details like that," he said. "And when they do, they won't ask questions first." The stubborn part of her wanted to push back again, to tell him she wasn't going to live her life afraid of shadows. But the truth was, she could feel something tightening in her gut, the same feeling she'd get before a sudden storm when the air got heavier without warning. Riker must have seen it on her face because his voice softened. "If you won't take it off, at least be aware of who's watching you." "Who's watching me?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he gave her a slow nod, turned, and walked back out the way he'd come. Tanisha stood there, the echo of his words still in her ears. She told herself he was exaggerating, maybe even trying to spook her into compliance, but deep down, she knew he wasn't the kind of man to waste his breath on empty warnings. She closed the crate, locked it, and signed off the inventory log. Still, every time she bent to grab another part, her eyes flicked toward the hangar door, half expecting someone else to appear with more cryptic advice. But the next person who came looking for her wouldn't bother with advice. They'd come asking for the patch itself. By the time Tanisha left the hangar that evening, the heat outside felt like it had baked through the concrete itself. Her coveralls clung to her shoulders, the patch warm under the fabric. She didn't bother with the shuttle. The barracks were only a short walk, and she needed a little time to think. Every step brought her back to Riker's voice. "Target on your arm." And to that overheard conversation, it was one thing to be the subject of military gossip. It was another to have your name wrapped around words like dangerous and classified. When she pushed open the barracks door, the blast of air conditioning hit her like a wall. The common room smelled faintly of reheated pizza and floor cleaner. A few soldiers lounged on mismatched couches, flipping channels on the TV. Her roommate, Yanel Ruiz, sat cross-legged at the coffee table, playing cards with two others. "Hey," Yanel said without looking up. "You're late. Everything break down today or what?" Tanisha dropped onto the couch opposite her, pulling off her cap. "Nope, just had a weird conversation." Yanel finally looked up, catching the serious tone. "Weird how?" Tanisha tugged at her sleeve just enough to glance at the patch. "It's about this." The guy sitting next to Yanel, Private First Class Mark Givens, leaned in. "That old patch. Didn't think you were the type to customize your uniform. It was my uncle's," Tanisha said. "Wore it for years. Nobody's ever said a thing about it until today." She told them about Riker, about the way he'd stared at it like it carried a curse, and about the whispered conversation she'd overheard. She kept her tone even, but she could feel the edge creeping into her voice. Yanel set her cards down. "Okay, so he says it's from some ghost unit, and now you're supposed to what?" "Just take it off, apparently," Tanisha said. Mark shook his head. "That sounds like superstition mixed with paranoia. Units get deactivated all the time. Maybe he's just one of those guys who lives on conspiracy forums." "Except he didn't sound like he was making it up," Tanisha said, "and the guy he was talking to didn't sound like a jokester either." One of the other soldiers, a quiet specialist named Devon Price, looked up from his phone. "You ever think maybe you don't want to know what it means? Sometimes the less you ask, the better you sleep." Tanisha's eyes narrowed. "You saying I should just ignore someone basically telling me I'm wearing a target?" "I'm saying," Devon replied, "that if it's real, There's probably a reason it's classified. And if it's fake, you're stressing over nothing. Yanel crossed her arms. Personally, I'd find out. If someone's dropping cryptic hints about my family, I'm not just letting it go. Tanisha leaned back against the couch. That's the thing. Riker said everyone from that unit was supposed to be dead. If that's true, then my uncle. She trailed off, unsure how to finish. The table went quiet. Yanel finally broke it. Maybe your aunt knows more than she's told you. That thought lodged itself in Tanisha's mind instantly. She hadn't asked her aunt much over the years. The topic of Uncle Rodney's service had always been handled with polite silence. But if anyone could confirm or deny Riker's story, it would be her. She stood, grabbing her phone from her pocket. I'll call her after chow. Mark gave her a look halfway between concern and curiosity. If she tells you it's nothing, will you believe her? I guess we'll find out, Tanisha said. The rest of the evening passed in pieces. The clatter of trays in the mess hall. The lazy conversation about weekend plans. The faint hum of the barracks TV, but beneath it all, the weight of the patch on her sleeve felt heavier than it had that morning. By the time she was back in her room, sitting cross-legged on her bunk with the phone in her hand, she'd already rehearsed what to say. But that didn't stop her thumb from hovering over the call button. But before she could press it, a knock on the barracks door would bring a different kind of answer. And it wouldn't come from her aunt. The knock wasn't casual. It was the kind of firm, three-tap rhythm that made you straighten in your seat without knowing why. Yanel looked up from her book across the room, one eyebrow raised. You expecting someone? She asked. Tanisha shook her head and slid off the bunk. When she opened the door, two men stood in the hallway. Neither wore a uniform, but both had the posture of people who'd spent their lives in one. The taller one was in a navy windbreaker despite the heat, his hair cut sharp enough to line up with a ruler. The other wore a plain grey button-down, sleeves rolled once, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. Indoors, Specialist Cole? The tall one asked. That's me. He held up a leather case just long enough for her to catch the flash of a badge and an ID she didn't have time to read. We'd like to talk to you for a few minutes. Yanel was on her feet now, crossing the room. About what? The man in the sunglasses answered instead. It's regarding a personal item in your possession. Might be easier to discuss somewhere private. Tanisha glanced from one to the other. If you're talking about the patch, you can say it right here. They exchanged a look that said they weren't used to being refused. The windbreaker man sighed. This would go a lot smoother if we could sit down without an audience. Yanel's arms folded across her chest. She's not going anywhere without telling me first. The sunglasses man ignored her and focused on Tanisha. The patch you're wearing, where did you get it? She kept her tone even. I already answered that question today. My uncles. When? A couple years ago. And you've been wearing it since? Yeah, why? This time the taller man took a step closer, lowering his voice. Because that insignia belongs to a disbanded unit. Highly classified. We are talking clearance levels way above yours or mine. And it should have been destroyed with the rest of their equipment. Tanisha kept her gaze steady. So why are you here? To confiscate it? That would be best. Sunglasses said. It's safer for you. Her hands curled at her sides. Not happening. It's family. The tall man's jaw tensed, but he didn't raise his voice. Specialist Cole, I need you to understand. Keeping that patch could put you in a position you do not want to be in. People have been hurt over less. That got Yanel moving. She stepped between them, her voice sharper than usual. She said she's not giving it up. You got a problem? You can go through her CO. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sunglasses reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. He set it on the small table by the door. If you change your mind, call that number. It's sooner rather than later. Without another word, they turned and walked away, their footsteps fading down the hall. Tanisha shut the door and leaned against it. What the hell was that? You tell me, Yanel said. Because I've never had guys in plain clothes come sniffing around for a patch. Tanisha picked up the card. It had no name, no agency. Just a phone number and the words contact directly. Urgent matters only. She set it back down. Her thoughts tangling faster than she could untangle them. Riker's warning, the overheard conversation. And now two strangers telling her to hand over something that had been hers for years. Yanel crossed her arms. You still think it's nothing? Tanisha didn't answer right away. Her mind was already moving toward the next step. If these guys were telling the truth, Her aunt might be the only one left who could explain why a piece of her uncle's service history had suddenly turned into a liability. She grabbed her phone from the bunk. Did I need to make that call? But what her aunt would reveal wasn't going to make her feel safer. It was going to make her realize she'd been carrying more than just a memory on her sleeve. Tanisha sat on the edge of her bunk, phone pressed to her ear, the dial tone pulsing against the silence in the room. Yanel lingered by the desk, pretending to check her email, but clearly listening in. Her aunt picked up on the fourth ring. Hey, baby. Everything all right? Yeah. Sort of, Tanisha said. Do I need to ask you something about Uncle Rodney? There was a pause before her aunt replied. What about him? You remember that patch I sewed on my coveralls? The one from his stuff? Her aunt's voice sharpened. Why? Did somebody say something about it? More than one somebody, Tanisha said. First a pilot, then two guys in plain clothes showed up at the barracks asking for it. They acted like it's radioactive, said it belonged to a unit that's supposed to be gone, like completely gone. The line went quiet long enough for Tanisha to glance at the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Aunt Lorraine. I told him this might happen. Her aunt said finally, her voice lower now. Did I told your uncle he shouldn't keep any of it, but he wouldn't listen. Tanisha felt her chest tighten. Keep any of what? That patch is from the 17th Reconnaissance Detachment, Lorraine said, only that's not what they call themselves in the field. They went by Red Lantern. Tanisha's grip on the phone tightened. Riker mentioned that name, said no one outside the unit's supposed to know about it. That's because what they were doing wasn't supposed to exist, Lorraine said. Your uncle wasn't just on patrols or regular missions. They were sent to find things, people, equipment, documents, before anyone else could, sometimes before our own side could. And when they found them, they didn't always bring them back. Tanisha's mind flashed to the Eagle and Bolt insignia. You mean, they destroyed them? Destroyed, buried, made disappear. Whatever it took, Lorraine said. It was dangerous work. And when something went wrong, there was no backup coming. Officially, they weren't even there. She didn't know what to say. The image of her uncle that she'd carried all her life, quiet, patient, the kind of man who fixed your bike without you even asking, didn't line up with the man her aunt was describing. So why do people care so much about a patch? Tanisha asked. Because it's proof, Lorraine said simply. Proof the unit existed. Proof your uncle survived long enough to bring something home. If someone's looking for it, it's because they don't want that proof floating around. A knot of unease twisted deeper in Tanisha's stomach. You think someone would hurt me over it? I think people have done worse for less, Lorraine said. If those men told you to hand it over, maybe you should. Tanisha stared down at her sleeve. I can't. It's the only piece of him I have left. Her aunt's voice softened. Baby, your uncle loved you. But he wouldn't want you in danger over something he left behind. She thought about that for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me all this before? Because I thought if you didn't know, no one else would care, Lorraine said. Clearly, I was wrong. They talked for a few minutes more, mostly her aunt repeating that she should get rid of it, before Tanisha promised to think about it, and ended the call. When she set the phone down, Yanel was watching her closely. So? Tanisha leaned back against the wall. Riker wasn't lying. The patch is from a classified unit. My uncle was in it. And apparently it's more than just an old piece of cloth. It's proof of something the army once erased. Yanel frowned. Which means keeping it is asking for trouble. Yeah, Tanisha said quietly, but giving it up feels like losing him all over again. She sat there, fingers tracing the edge of the patch, mind tugged in two directions. She'd thought the day's weirdness would fade after a few hours. Instead, it was getting heavier, like a weight sliding deeper into her pocket. But before she could decide what to do, she'd start noticing the eyes, the ones that didn't look away when she caught them watching. The first time she noticed it, she told herself it was coincidence. She'd been heading from the mess hall to the motor pool, coffee in hand, when she spotted a man leaning against a tan Humvee near the corner of the lot. Dark ball cap, aviator sunglasses, hands tucked casually into his pockets. Nothing unusual, except that his head turned to follow her the entire way across the pavement. The second time, she couldn't write it off. She was running a routine parts pickup from the supply depot, arms full of box components, when she caught the same ball cap and glasses in the reflection of the depot's glass door. He was sitting on a bench under a tree this time, pretending to scroll through his phone. By the third sighting, the knot in her gut was no longer subtle. It was after sunset, the base quieting down for the night. She and Yanel were walking back from the PX, bags swinging at their sides, when Yanel suddenly slowed. Don't turn around, she murmured. Guy in a ball cap about 50 feet back, same direction as us. Tanisha didn't have to look. She already knew who it was. You've seen him too? She asked under her breath. Yeah, yesterday near the gym, Yanel said. You think he's following you? Feels like it. When they reached the barracks, Tanisha made a show of fumbling for her keycard while Yanel unlocked the door. She risked a quick glance over her shoulder. The man was across the street now, leaning against a lamppost, face tipped down toward his phone again. Inside, Yanel locked the door behind them. Okay, that's it. We are talking to Riker. If he knows this patch is a problem, he's the one who needs to tell you how deep it goes. Tanisha hesitated. What if he's part of the problem? Then at least we'll know, Yanel said. Better than playing blind. The next afternoon, she found Riker in one of the smaller briefing rooms, hunched over a laptop. He looked up when she stepped inside, and his eyes flicked immediately to her sleeve. Cole, he said slowly, you decided to take my advice? Not exactly, she said. I've got a better question. Why is someone tailing me all over base? Riker's chair squeaked as he leaned back. Describe him: ball cap, sunglasses, average build, likes to pretend he's busy on his phone. Riker's face darkened. You've seen him more than once? 3 times in 2 days, and I'm pretty sure that's just when I noticed he closed the laptop and stood. That's not random. You think it's connected to the patch? I think it's connected to whoever still cares about Red Lantern, he said, and if they've got someone following you here, they're not worried about protocol. Which means they're not military police. They're outside the chain of command. Tanisha crossed her arms. So now what? You want me to hand the patch over to the guys in plain clothes who showed up at my door? Riker shook his head. No, not them. If you're smart, you'll get it to someone who can actually protect you. And not the kind who'll just make it disappear. Like who? I know a contact, he said, off base. Civilian. Knows the history, knows the stakes. But would have to move it quietly. If your shadow sees you leaving with me, we've got a bigger problem. Tanisha stuttered him. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. A flicker of urgency. And why help me? She asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it was short. Because I've seen what happens to people caught in the middle of this, and I don't want to read your name in a report. She hated that a part of her believed him. Fine, she said, but if we are doing this, it's on my terms. I'm not just handing over my uncle's legacy to someone I've never met. Fair enough, he said, but don't wait too long to decide. Your shadow's not going to get bored and move on.